everybody. Welcome to the last but definitely not least panel today, the future of funding. My name is Nidia Zhang. I am the co-founder and chairman of Social Alpha Foundation. We are a small not-for-profit grant-making foundation that based on Hong Kong that support blockchain innovation and research for social impact. But today I have a much more important job, which is being the moderator for this amazing panel. So we only have 20 minutes, and I have a lot of questions. We have a lot to cover. So without further ado, we will start with a round of introduction of everybody. Please state your name, your organization, and what you do.
Hi. Hello. Hi, I'm Ken. I'm from the Ethereum Foundation. I help with the ecosystem support program, previously known as the grants program. It's been a nice, fun ride from when Vitalik first launched the 2018 blog post. We need to fund scalability to where we are right now, where talking about more holistically helping projects and then trying to understand what are your needs, what are your challenges, and trying to build an actual kind of successful environment around that to make sure that every project is getting everything that they do need in order to be successful. Figuring out what that actually means to be successful, right? Because it's always there's no one clear answer for what each project needs as successful. So that's what I do.
Terry Culver from Ethereum Classic Labs. We run an accelerator where we host about 25 projects a year. We provide investment, office space, incubation more generally. We also have a development team that manages the Ethereum Classic blockchain. And more recently, we're looking at supporting projects that have direct social impact with blockchain because personally, my view is if you're not considering the end user, the chances that the technology actually gets adopted go significantly down.
Hi, my name is Sandra Rowe. I'm the CEO of the Global Blockchain Business Council, which is a Swiss-based nonprofit focusing on educating some of our world leaders and executives at some of the biggest companies out there, trying to unpack the mystery that is to some of them, blockchain and crypto. I also focus on social impact projects, so I work with a number of farmers in rural parts of the world, quite varied, and I also help independent artists through another project. So I look at the use of technology through the eyes of, are we solving real world problems here, and how can we really focus on what is considered, the question around the common good and elevating the human condition.
Thank you. So for those of you who remember, in the very beginning I said I'm not important at all, you can forget about me, I'll just MC, and that's still true, but today in this panel I'll be talking about two of my perspectives. So one, I'm a regular tech VC and investor, so I do not focus necessarily on blockchain, but I look at all types of startups using AI or IoT, etc. So today perhaps I can give you the perspective on what does the regular VCs look for in blockchain projects today. And my second perspective is I have been working as an impact investor for an organization called Mistletoe, run by Son Taizo, and we have made both social impact type investments into startups and also blockchain projects. So from those two perspectives, I'd love to share with you what exactly I'm seeing right now and what's the interest and what are the kind of convergence of those two fields. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think today we're extremely lucky that we have such an interesting mix. I think we have people that's covering grant making from the native blockchain community, and then we have people that are really experienced working with, let's say, government sector and the public sector, and then we have venture capitalists and then impact investor. So, I consider if the blockchain industry is a human body, that they are all important organs, and then, you guys work independently, but also have to coordinate with each other. And, not to mention today, I've seen so many amazing projects, and then as a grant-making foundation, I want to, I was talking to myself, I want to fund all of them. So I guess, and I wonder if Candace and then, Terry share the same feeling. So I guess my first question will go to, Candace first. Tell us briefly about how EF grants work, and then what is your 2019's focus? I mean, if you feel comfortable, tell us, how much money have you giving out, and is there a favorite project?
Oh, well, they're all my babies, so you can't really have a favorite, right? No,
I
so
know you must have them.
I love them all. Well, so the grants program, I think, is it's really interesting to think about. You know, what do you actually want to do with grant making, right? What does the Ethereum Foundation need to make sure that we can do to empower everything else in Ethereum to have a seat at the table and to be able to voice their opinions, right? It's the idea behind the Ethereum Foundation is providing funds to so and so projects. I think is a little misguided because I want to make sure that what we do is at the very heart just empowering other teams to be able to be able to stand on its own, right? And I like maybe this is wrong for me to think about, but when projects apply to the ecosystem support program, which is what we call now on the website is ecosystem.support to make it simple for everybody, or you can still go to grants.ethereum.org. But I like it, super simple. We want to make sure that anyone can apply. We make it super simple. The application now is like 6 questions. We make it as vague as possible because we want anyone and everyone. And so recently, like we had 3 high school kids apply, and they just said, we did this hackathon working on a healthcare blockchain project. And at that point, up until this point, we really don't do DApp level funding. But what ecosystem support allows us to do is work with anyone and everyone to think about what are your goals, what do you actually want to accomplish in 6 months, and how do we get you there, right? If you want to have VC funding at the end of 6 months, let's figure out what a project roadmap looks like. If I don't know how to do this, what we've been able to do in the grants program is we've built a network of advisors, of network experts. Like over 130 people have volunteered their hours to us and just work with teams like this, right? And I love to be able to just continue this thing. So it's less about what does the Ethereum Foundation want to fund versus how do we leverage all the resources at our disposal to make sure that these projects can get into the spotlight, right? But in terms of financials, which is what everyone wants to know about, but it's less important because I think there's so much more around building successful projects. Last year we committed $27+ million. This year, I obviously have the spring update. We're committing over $30 million, or $30 million this year. So far, we've deployed, I think, close to 60% of that. So yeah, I mean, we're not stopping on funding. We have, and this is kind of my fault. We've kind of pulled back a lot on the public blog posts. But that doesn't mean that we've stopped any velocity of funding. We haven't stopped any velocity of helping projects. And I want to continue being able to expand on that, right? Like, what does it mean to provide support, right? And I want that to be a very holistic way of looking at what support means.
Thank you. Okay, Terry.
Sure. So we tend to be fairly opportunistic in what we look at. And we have both a formal process and an informal process. The formal process is applications for our accelerator. Excuse me. We have 2 deadlines every year. We bring in 12 to 14 projects at a time. We do interviews, and you can go online and find that process is pretty clear. The informal process is really focused on identifying opportunities that might not necessarily be suitable for an accelerator. We don't want to simply restrict ourselves by geography or by subject area or by needs simply because a really good project doesn't need office space in San Francisco or equity investment. And in the informal process, the 3 questions that we're looking for people to answer, and not all 3, you only need to answer 1, but are you pursuing a fundamental research or development question that helps address some of the challenges of blockchain, like scalability, like storage, like congestion, and that's highly technical. The second is, are you building up infrastructure that makes it easier for people to use this system? And the third is, are you developing use cases that actually drive adoption, that fulfill the promise of the technology? Our funding ranges between probably $50,000 for something that's really early stage concept on up to $1 million.
do you mind elaborating a little bit of some of the projects that you already have given grants to?
Sure, so 2 recent projects we've given funding to. One is called Saldo, and it's a blockchain remittance platform that allows immigrants in the US to send remittances home, primarily to Latin America, for much lower cost and much greater speed than other providers like Western Union. Another is OS City, which is an urban planning platform that allows cities to collect data and also register certain key information on the blockchain, like land title, in growing cities and emerging markets where you have rapid urbanization. There's more, but those are 2.
Interesting. And how does, if you don't mind me asking, how does the ETC Lab work with EF grants? Do you guys, what's the dynamic?
Oh, I learn a lot from Ken.
We learn a lot from each other. No, this is good. So it's one of those things where like people want to make sure that there's some level of antagonism, but there's no antagonism at all. Terry is awesome. We both live in New York. We had coffee in the park. It's honestly great. Like what I love seeing. I think so, right? We're friends, right? Yeah. No, we're friends, right? So like this, it's really interesting to see, how people like to think that like in Web3 there is some level of like hatred for each other, but I don't think that's true at all, right? Like I think if we can all come together and collaboratively finance projects, whether it's grant funding or VC funding, incubating, like all of it, none of that really matters. It's that level of support that allows project to be incentive aligned with all of us, right? And as Terry said, there's a lot of shared infrastructure. It doesn't make sense to say like, oh, these guys are only Ethereum, or these guys are only ETC. I mean, that's kind of silly.
Absolutely, I think this is an extremely important message to be sent, to not just the audience here, but actually the entire blockchain ecosystem. So let's move to Sandra. So Sandra, you work a lot, with government sector, public sector policymakers. I will imagine that is a completely different world, compared to a blockchain community. So what do you find the most challenging when you want to educate and advocate some of the ideas that's seem very common in blockchain, but somehow maybe extremely difficult for other people?
Yeah, I mean, look, what we're talking about here are not just technological changes. We're talking about paradigm shifts, pushing up against established ways of certain institutions existing, and that's not uncomfortable. That is uncomfortable for many governments that are out there. But I will have to say, for the ones who are open-minded and looking at adopting the technology, having governments as partners allows something that I think we should not dismiss very easily, which is their ability to scale. Think about it. If a small country, and I will give this example because we're working with them right now, wants to institute a education technology revolution inside of their own country, their departments get together, they pass decrees, they pass laws, and they put that together, they're able to do that. Then all of a sudden in the next year, you've got a blockchain adopted, not only educational programs, but online and offline, by the way, as well as the education certification that was discussed earlier today. This is about a country doing it. Partnering with certain countries, not all, when they're that open-minded and eager to make it happen, actually I think is magic if we can all collaborate and find the right opportunities. Because let's face it, this community has the cutting-edge ideas, solutions, but sometimes you need the resources and the scale to really make transformative change. And so I think it's about us finding those opportunities with the right partners and making sure that that collaboration continues, because frankly, I've been in this space for a long time and I'm more excited, I've not been more excited than I am now about what's happening. And I think we should all be really excited because real stuff is happening and it's affecting people's lives in a positive way, let's hope so, and that it's going to scale. So this whole blockchain is a fake thing or blockchain's not happening, we're past that now, we're way past that.
And since we're I'm still gonna hold you to it. And since we're in Japan, what have you seen, let's say, for the past 2 years? How things are different. Do you think anything has changed, especially in Japan, or what is the difference between Japan and US?
I'll be very frank with you. I'm here for the week to do a bit of reconnaissance because we have not been in Japan in the last couple of years. And frankly, we've got members out of Tokyo that I'm going to be visiting. But I'm actually here to meet with startups, to understand what the landscape looks like. And frankly, you know, to hear it in the media or to hear it from some of our members is great, but it's nothing like being physically in the country and having those face-to-face meetings. So I am a bit on an education trip myself. So if anyone's out there, if you're based in Japan, I'd love to meet you.
Sandra will stick around after this. Everybody know where to find her.
I'll be here for you.
So let's move to Erica. I have two parts of questions for you because you have two different hats. One is a traditional venture capitalist, and the other is impact investor. So I guess the first question will be, you as a VC, what kind of project you think that are interesting for 2019, and maybe in Japanese kind of like a blockchain context, and then for impact investing, which is is still a relatively new idea for the entire investing industry. So what do you see impact investing in blockchain will look like?
Sure. So those are great questions, Lydia, thank you. I'm going to answer them a little bit circumventing the question. Hopefully I'll get back to it, but I want to talk about kind of the convergence between regular VC and this blockchain world community today. Nydia, you were mentioning there were different parts of the organ, and then you mentioned how, the grants works with the accelerator program. So I really see that in the VC space versus the blockchain space now in two ways. So, and also as Sandra said, like really the real things are happening in the blockchain space. And so in that way, before it was kind of like VCs are going to be disrupted firstly by ICO. So that was kind of a threat. So that was kind of an antagonistic relationship between VCs and the blockchain space. And then the second kind of connotation was that, well, blockchain is actually too futuristic, so it's not really investable by regular VCs. So now what I'm seeing is that it's slowly converging. So of course, you see some projects still being funded through equity by regular VCs into the blockchain space. And I can talk about what those areas are, which are more that regular VCs are looking into. But before that, the convergence aspect is twofold, which I mentioned. And one is that the types of problems that are being solved by startups, regular tech startups, and the blockchain space today is becoming more and more similar. So today we had, a whole focus was really on making impact to society. So more and more of that we're seeing in the regular tech space. And I think that's a positive for all of us. And I think you can imagine why. Because of the tech lash, there are being newer solutions where we want more decentralized solutions or Web3 type solutions. So for example, just, a tech kind of conference or an investment key meeting is something called Y Combinator. I'm sure you guys have heard of it. So, a lot of VCs invest in the new ideas. So Airbnbs and the Dropboxes all came from there. So Y Combinator this year are tackling a lot more socially minded solutions. And it was really, so that's why I see a lot of convergence between what the space here today, what you guys are working on, and perhaps it doesn't necessarily use blockchain technologies, but it has the same ethos of empowering the end users and also enabling access, democratizing access. So and one example is that at the Y Combinator Demo Days, there was a solution for climate change and trying to reduce carbon emissions. So that we've seen actually in the blockchain space. I'm sure you've seen some of those solutions, and we're seeing that now in tech. So I really appreciate that convergence, and so I think the blockchain space can take credit for inspiring more of the larger tech community, so that's one thing. And another thing is, I think the blockchain space, we have always been focused on transparency and the intention behind, or the consensus mechanisms, but we're seeing more of that kind of deep dive into what's happening in VC. So it's been a reckoning a year for the VC industry because we're seeing, so these large VCs, they're feeding a lot of capital into these large startups, but who's funding the VCs? That's been a question that's been asked recently, and more people are looking at the funding sources, and we're seeing, some scandals come out of that as well, but that's more transparency. So those are the things I'm seeing in a more higher level picture. But in terms of the blockchain technologies that are being VC funded, it's usually a little bit less futuristic or perhaps ideal-minded as what the projects you are working on today, but a lot of them that I do see that VCs are funding today are perhaps, related to the exchanges still, or also in the gaming industries or the collectibles market, because there is more of an immediate or short-term kind of product around that in a market around that as well. But that's only in the short term, but in the long term, I do see a convergence of people working on real impact solutions.
Thank you so much. Kelsey just showed me the paper, so I am conscious of time. I'm gonna open up to the audience. Please raise your hands, ask questions. We have a very, rare combination of panelists today, and I hope you guys ask interesting questions.
I guess for everyone, what do you think is the biggest challenge this year, or like 2019, 2020, with blockchain?
We will have to.
I'm going to keep it short. I'm going to say scaling the hundreds of projects doing the similar or same thing. I see that around the world again and again and again. So we got to scale together.
I think it's alignment of mission when it comes to either blockchain projects, regardless what are you working on. I guess we start to see a lot of C-level executives start to leave certain blockchain companies. I guess it's a good time to start to reflect why are you in this industry for, and then start to readjust or realign or recreate your vision for the industry, and then set your goal again.
Yeah. So with E2 coming up, right? It's what now, right? What happens when we hit mainnet? Who's here and what dApps are being used? I think when the scalability question is answered, it's who's using it, right? And what dApps actually persist, and why are we using these dApps, right? I think that to me is the biggest question. Is especially when I talk to VCs, it's like what's going to happen, right? Like what is actually going to be funded? What is going to sustain? What does sustainable funding even look like, right? Like how do we actually make sure? Because the question in my mind is always like, these projects are really cool, and I would love to see them in the real world. But if you're disrupting the middleman, you're disrupting the businesses, you're creating a new business model. But what is the new business model, right? If you have no business model, then you just exist. But the projects that exist mean that you yourself don't need to be there. So now what do we do?
I would just add to that more rigor to make sure that the projects actually need the technology to solve the problem you're trying to solve. I still think, at least in the proposals we see, that many of them could be solved in cheaper and more efficient ways.
Yeah, one last thing, I think we are seeing a lot of progress and actual things being built, but it's still early stages. And what I really appreciate now is that people are realizing it's still early stages, and not humble, but more realistic. So I think that realistic expectation setting stage is really great. So the next step is, what's the next realistic milestone to really commit to? So once you hit those milestones, step by step, we'll start gaining more and more credibility in this space. So I'm excited for that.
Do we have time for one more question? Two more. Please.
If you could redesign anything about grants or a grant-giving body from first principles, what would it be?
I hope we can craft a better mechanism for impact measurement.
That's not fair. I feel like I'm shooting myself in the foot, right? I think grants are amazing. I think we're doing an amazing job. Impact measure is a big one. I think it's really hard. Even like outside, right? Before I was in Ethereum, I did a lot of biometric research, and so with that, like grant making is one of the hardest things, because you do have to understand that everything is forward looking. So how do you actually look back and say like this works or this didn't work, right? So even what I said earlier, right? What is success, and failure to accomplish something is also a success, right? What does that actually mean, and how do you actually quantify what that looks like? A lot of times it's very qualitative, and you have an intuition for what makes sense, but it doesn't always kind of map out to, I guess, what we look at as like statistics, like what is statistically significant to be successful, right? That is a big question.
I would say diversity of funding sources. I think you need different sources to provide balance, to provide maybe some competition, and also so that, you know, people aren't reliant on just one or two sources of funding.
Hi. Oh, is this more? I'll stop. No, go ahead.
Okay, real quick. So kind of in the grant similar space, since I was doing impact investing, just one thing to note is it's a very challenging space, and you have lofty goals, and it's very difficult. What I wish I saw more of, it's a little bit different to your question, but what I wish I saw more was more care and support for the teams, because if it's in a regular startup environment, there's a lot of help for organization, how to hire, how to keep motivated. But in this kind of impact space, it's really up to these individual entrepreneurs to have these lofty goals and really to try to reach them, and there's not so much support, so these kind of communities are important. But I think we still don't have enough research on how to support these teams and how to, you know, because the people like us or you, I'm sure, have lofty goals, but they also have egos, so how do you manage that? That kind of research I don't think is still available, so I'd love to see that.
Okay. So thanks for all your feedback. I have a question about kind of value chains, and so one of the, I think the issues is that there's some grant financing, there's some investment financing, and there's some like macro overview, right? So just different parts of the puzzle. And how do we like link it all together? Because you can throw a little bit of cash at something, and that can, you know, especially from a humanitarian perspective, we can kind of fund a startup and let it go, and then it kind of like dies off. So I'm wondering, what sort of platform plays are you guys looking at? How do you guys play together nicely? Not in terms of like you're beating each other up, but what's that commitment to take something from here to there, and using the type of resources you have? You represent the entire, in some cases you represent the entire value chain there.
It's an interesting question, right? I think, you know, there's, so for us, I think we're in a very special position. You know, we're able to start from the very ground up. You know, like, what is your project? What do you want to do? You win at a hackathon, let's fund it, let's kick it off, right? And I think that's the most beautiful part of what we can do with the Ethereum Foundation. And then provide them, you know, kind of the support to be able to say, okay, now what's next, right? After you have financing, after you have funding to go for the next, you know, 6 to 12 months, you know, how much more do you need to get to where you want to go? And what is that endpoint? What is that milestone we're talking about? Do you want to get VC funding? Do you want more exposure? Do you want mentorship, right? Who can we connect you with to be able to find that support and really build you that kind of path? But, you know, for us, I love working with Terry. I love working with, you know, anyone else who's willing to put in funds in these projects with VCs. Like, it really is fundamentally, like, if we are all aligned with these projects and kind of where they want to go, there's no, like, I have literally no issue with anybody. I love talking to people and working with them and trying to figure out how we can all put money towards something. The biggest problem I've seen is people not wanting to, you know, take money out of their pocket. But, you know, I think that's a different question. But, like, for me, you know, let's keep throwing money at things, you know, like, why stop?
I think increased coordination just makes it positive sum for everybody. You know, because if you give a grant, well, the question is what's viable? How is that enterprise viable after you give a grant? You know, and so it's a matter of communicating with other actors in the space to make sure that someone can pick that up, or there's some kind of path for that project.
Absolutely.
There's a couple different things here that I think we fundamentally, I would like to see a fundamental reshaping of the way funding happens. So if I'm an entrepreneur sitting in Morocco, let's say, I have it infinitely more difficult, and actually I was just talking to one in Ecuador, so I'm going to change that to Ecuador. I want to raise funding in Ecuador. I have probably 100x more difficult time than somebody sitting in New York or San Francisco. I'd like to see that change, and there's no short answer to that one. And frankly, here's the thing. If everyone did get funded, at some point there's competition. And so not everyone can win, but I would hope that everyone would at least have a fair shot if they have a good idea and a good team. And this is where we are today, which is the fair shot's not there globally. And I'd like to see that first, is how do we democratize the fundraising, at least at the very, very early stage.
Thank you very much.
Quick answer to Adam's question. I think there's 2 points. One is that if there's diversity within each of these pools of investors, then there's knowledge share that's more easy. Because if it's groupthink, like VCs should be this way, grants should be done this way, public markets should be operating this way, then it's very hard to coordinate. But if there's like a diverse team in each of them, then it's much easier to collaborate and communicate, so that's one thing. And the other thing that you can do short term, I think, is really choose your investors. So it is really hard and it is really siloed right now. So you really should take a good understanding, first learn the market and see, is my business or is my project most suited for a grant or a VC or a loan, or, so I think if you unfortunately go into the wrong lane, it's going to be very difficult for you. But that's why I think you should choose very wisely in the beginning, like what suits your business model and your milestone and your timeline.
Thank you, everybody. One last question, and then we're done here.
Hi everyone, my name is Ben from Africa Blockchain Alliance. So along the lines of your last question is, how do you ensure that there's more representation, especially for underrepresented groups from Africa? So there are a lot of people working on blockchain projects in Africa, and one thing I keep hearing is there's no support from the global ecosystem. So I think two questions is, first question is, what is representation, for instance, from Africa, from Latin America, in your grants or your accelerator and all of those things? And secondly, if it isn't that much, what is your plan to increase that representation?
I would say first off, we did our first hackathon last year with the Youth Ministry of Rwanda, and it was 100 developers focusing on clean economy solutions using blockchain, and we're going to be doing more of that. We have targeted markets where we're going to focus. We can't be everywhere, but we're going to go through the hackathon mechanism to start off. Maybe others have other.
Yeah, I mean, we do a fair amount of just old-fashioned outreach. We've been, I think, somewhat successful in Latin America, and maybe because there's already a certain awareness of crypto markets, and because of the economic pressures, a certain familiarity with Bitcoin. So I think that leads into development around blockchain. We've had less success in Africa, although we'll continue trying. And a lot of success in South Asia. There's already a heightened awareness and I think a lot of entrepreneurship taking place.
For social foundation, because I think a lot of time when it comes to grant making, you just have to really put efficiency in heart. So for us, let's say this year we put the environment as our priority. So then we start to look at not by geography, but more with the root of the problems. So we try as much as we can, to cover as much region as we can. But I do have to admit that it's a process. And we do hope that there will be more support that coming from different communities, and then there will be a platform that everybody can access information, at least a fair amount of information simultaneously, so we can all work together better.
This is cool because I feel like you actually have something to say, and this isn't really a question. You actually want to tell us about what you're doing, but that's awesome because that's what we want to know, right? Like for us, we'd love to hear more pockets of people speak up and say like, hey, look what we're doing, and then we'll go, great, come here, let's apply for a grant, let's figure out what we can do together. Like that's exciting to me. So obviously there was ETH Cape Town last year. There might be ETH something else in Africa in the next coming months, which would it's gonna be awesome. But there's so much really cool stuff that's going on that it's like the biggest problem that I saw in nonprofit was that there are so many disparate communities that are working on very similar things, right? The biggest problem again, just echo what everyone else said, coordination, right? There's we're having a very big problem and friction getting coordinated and understanding that we're all working on very similar things. So for us, we'd like to hear more from everyone else to say like, I would love to know, Ben, what are you working on after this? And let's talk, and let's figure out like how we build more in Africa. Let's do it.
Okay, guess we are wrapping up here, and please go approach us. If you have any questions, we'll be around. And thank you everybody for joining us on this panel today.
Thank you guys so much. I think Ben is actually one of the Ethereum Foundation scholars, and we're really
really pleased to have multiple scholars attend, thanks to
I'm not a scholar.
support. There you go. And thank you to the panel as well. Nidhi was one of the first people that we reached out to